In a galaxy where the strongest species battle for dominance, humans are about to shatter every expectation, proving that the deadliest strength doesn't come from size or power, but from surviving a death world. Watch as they break records, stun aliens, and redefine what it means to be unstoppable. The ground trembled beneath the relentless rhythm of distant artillery, each explosion pounding like a grim heartbeat across the ruined battlefield. Soldiers from every allied race, the towering Key, the insectoid Carven, the stoic Toyne, and the blue-skinned Aronian warriors, held their positions with dwindling hope, their bodies covered in the grime and blood of a battle that had stretched on for days without pause. Among them, a cloud of silent desperation lingered, thick as the smoke that choked the skies, casting an oppressive darkness over the shattered landscape. General Axer, an Aronian of grizzled age and experience, stood at the edge of a shallow trench, his sharp eyes squinting through the haze of smoke and falling debris. His mottled blue skin had faded to an ashen gray, a testament to the exhaustion and strain of leading his forces against the relentless advance of the Drax, a species as unforgiving as the worlds they conquered. In every direction, his troops held their positions with a tenuous grip on survival, fighting in small clusters and scattered outposts that barely resembled the grand, organized front they had established at the war's beginning. The Drax forces were unlike any enemy the Alliance had ever faced. They moved with a coordinated precision that bordered on unnatural, their formations flawless, their tactics ruthless. No creature, no machine, no strategy seemed capable of breaching their defenses. The Drax soldiers themselves wore sleek, jet-black armor that shimmered in the dim light, each line and angle of their gear optimized for intimidation as much as protection. Every time a Drax troop formation appeared on the horizon, the air grew colder, and the resolve of the Allied soldiers weakened just a little more. Axer glanced to his left, where a Carven scout crouched, her mandibles twitching nervously as her compound eyes scanned the horizon. Further along the line, an imposing Rari warrior, a 7-foot-tall mass of sinew and plated armor, gripped a plasma cannon with one massive, clawed hand, his posture rigid and tense. Next to him was Rank, Axer's second in command, a Tuvan with sharp, predatory features and an alertness that bordered on paranoia. Rank's pale gray skin had darkened with dirt and smoke, his uniform torn in places from close encounters with Drax foot soldiers. "General," Rank said, his voice low but urgent, barely audible over the distant roar of cannon fire. "We can't hold this line much longer. We're down to our last ammunition reserves, and half the men are too injured to continue." He looked up, his narrow eyes meeting Axer's with a rare flash of fear. "If we don't fall back now, we'll lose everyone. We're running on fumes." Axer let out a heavy breath, his gaze hardening as he stared into the thick, swirling fog that cloaked the enemy lines. "Fall back to where? Rank? There's nowhere left to retreat. If we give up this position, we might as well surrender the entire sector." Rank didn't argue. He knew the general was right. They'd already lost 4 sectors to the Drax in the last week alone. Each defeat had pushed them further back, each retreat a fresh reminder of their enemy's relentless progress. This was their final line of defense. If they fell here, the Drax would sweep through the remaining systems, with no one left to stop them. But as the minutes crawled by, the morale among the Allied soldiers continued to deteriorate. The lines that had once been thick with determined, grim-faced soldiers now looked hollow and sparse, filled with weary faces that wore expressions of resignation. Most of the soldiers clutched their weapons with shaking hands, eyes fixed on the ground as they prepared themselves for what they feared would be their last stand. Suddenly, a deep rumble rolled across the battlefield, louder than anything they'd heard before. The ground shook with the force of it, and Axer's heart skipped a beat as he looked toward the source of the noise. On the horizon, a massive formation of Drax tanks was advancing, their thick, armored shells gleaming under the dim light of the smoke-filled sky. The tanks were flanked by squads of Drax infantry, each soldier moving in perfect unison, a faceless wave of destruction that seemed unstoppable. The Allied soldiers watched in stunned silence as the Drax forces approached, their steps measured, each movement precise and mechanical. It was a sight that filled every heart with dread, and even Axer, who had seen countless battles in his long career, felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his chest. "General," came a quiet voice beside him. It was Rank, his face pale as he took in the sight of the approaching army. "We were not equipped for this. Those tanks, they'll rip through our defenses in minutes." Axer didn't respond. His mind raced, searching for a solution, a strategy, anything that could give them even a slim chance of survival. But the reality was bleak. They were outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. Every possible plan ended in the same way, total annihilation. Just as despair began to settle over the troops, a sharp crackle came through Axer's comm unit, cutting through the oppressive silence like a beacon. The voice on the other end was faint, distorted by static, but unmistakable in its urgency. General Axer, detecting unidentified vessels approaching from coordinates 1290. The voice trailed off, overwhelmed by the interference of nearby explosions, but Axer's attention was fully captured. Rank's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Reinforcements?" he whispered, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear in his voice. Axer's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his mind reeling at the possibility. Reinforcements were the only thing that could possibly save them now. But who would come? The rest of the Alliance was already stretched thin, with every available soldier deployed to defend other sectors. They hadn't received word of additional support for days, and every other attempt to call for backup had gone unanswered. Yet there was no mistaking the sudden buzz of excitement that spread through the ranks. Soldiers began to murmur, looking toward the sky with renewed hope. For the first time since the battle had begun, a glimmer of optimism flickered in the eyes of the Allied troops, a fragile light in the darkness. Moments later, the clouds parted, and through the thick haze of smoke and ash, they saw them. A squadron of sleek, silver-gray ships descended in a tight formation, cutting through the sky with a speed and precision that was unmistakably human. The Allied soldiers stared in awe as the ships approached, their hulls gleaming like beacons of salvation. The Drax forces faltered, their advance slowing as they too noticed the arrival of the newcomers. Axer could see the hesitation ripple through their ranks, the first sign of uncertainty they had shown since the battle began. The humans had arrived, and the mere sight of their vessels was enough to sow doubt in the minds of their enemies. As the ships touched down, the human cadets disembarked with practiced efficiency, their movements sharp and deliberate. Clad in dark armor that bore the insignia of the Deathworld Cadets, a division rumored to be comprised of soldiers from planets so hostile no other species dared to inhabit them, the humans exuded an aura of quiet, lethal confidence. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the battlefield with a calm intensity that belied the chaos around them. For a moment, Axer could only watch in stunned silence. He had heard stories of the Deathworld Cadets, whispered rumors of their near-mythical exploits, but he had never imagined he would see them in action. They were an elite force, the galaxy's last line of defense, called upon only in the most dire of circumstances. And here they were, standing before him, ready to face an enemy that had brought entire civilizations to their knees. The human squad leader, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a scar that ran diagonally across his face, approached Axer, his expression unreadable beneath his helmet. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, almost casual, as if the stakes of the battle meant nothing to him. "General Axer, I'm Captain Kale Ryder, Deathworld Cadet. We received a distress call." He paused, glancing at the battered soldiers around him. "Looks like we got here just in time." Axer nodded, his voice thick with gratitude and something else. Relief, perhaps, or the faintest stirrings of hope. We thought we were finished," he admitted, his words barely a whisper. Captain Ryder's gaze hardened, his eyes flashing with a fierce resolve. "Not today, General. Not if we have anything to say about it." And with that, he turned to his troops, his voice carrying over the battlefield with a steely confidence that rekindled the spirits of every soldier within earshot. "Deathworld Cadets, you know the drill. Let's show these Drax what happens when they push too far." As the human soldiers spread out across the front lines, taking up positions beside their alien allies, the entire atmosphere shifted. The despair that had blanketed the battlefield began to lift, replaced by an undercurrent of fierce determination. For the first time since the battle had begun, the Allies felt something they had thought long lost: hope. And as they prepared for the Drax's next move, a new determination settled over them, stronger than any armor, sharper than any blade. The tide was about to turn. As the Deathworld Cadets took their positions, an eerie silence settled over the battlefield. Soldiers of every species, a patchwork of armor, scales, fur, and exoskeleton, watched in a mixture of awe and trepidation as the humans settled in beside them. The Drax, known for their discipline and fearless advance, had halted just out of firing range for the first time. It was as if both sides felt an instinctual need to reevaluate their opponents. Captain Kale Ryder moved swiftly down the line, barking orders to his squad of cadets. They responded immediately, forming a tight perimeter with an efficiency that stunned their alien allies. The Deathworld Cadets had been trained for the worst conditions imaginable. They were soldiers who had been honed in environments so deadly that simply surviving was a mark of honor. To them, this battlefield was almost comfortable. General Axer watched Captain Ryder with a keen eye, noting the man's calm intensity. Ryder and his cadets seemed to exude an aura that went beyond skill or discipline. It was as if they had somehow embraced the inevitability of violence, made peace with the chaos that lay before them. Axer, whose years in combat had hardened him against nearly every horror the galaxy could offer, before, found himself oddly reassured by their presence beside him. Rank, the Tuvan officer, shifted nervously. "Sir, I don't know what to make of them," he muttered. They seem unafraid, almost like they enjoy it." Axer glanced at his lieutenant, giving him a wry smile. "They don't fear the battle, Rank. They've lived it over and over. This is what they do." Before Rank could respond, a sudden, deafening rumble shook the ground, sending clouds of dirt and debris flying. The Drax had resumed their advance. Their massive, 8-legged tanks stomped forward with mechanical precision, each one outfitted with weapons capable of obliterating an entire platoon in a single blast. Behind them, lines of Drax foot soldiers surged forward, dark figures marching in unison, every step in perfect sync. "Positions!" Captain Ryder's voice rang out, clear and commanding. The Deathworld Cadets sprang into action, each one moving with a level of confidence and coordination that bordered on reckless. In contrast to the Drax's rigid formation, the cadets seemed to thrive on fluidity, adapting their positioning to the changing landscape with an almost instinctual understanding. They weren't just following orders, they were anticipating, reacting, as though they could predict the enemy's every move. Ryder's squad had spread themselves across the lines, mingling with the alien forces. The Allied soldiers watched, tense and uncertain, as the humans prepared themselves. Some had fought alongside humans before, knew of their resilience and strength, but these cadets were different. There was a raw, unbreakable intensity in their eyes, something that went beyond mere duty. As the Drax forces drew nearer, the Allied lines braced, but now they were bolstered by a new, almost contagious courage. The humans' unyielding resolve became the backbone of the defense, the spine that held them steady in the face of approaching death. The soldiers from every corner of the galaxy had found their last hope in the unexpected resilience of humanity, an alliance forged not by similarity but by survival, by the shared knowledge that they would not go quietly into oblivion. For the first time since the clash had erupted, the Allied forces felt something they had long believed lost: hope. As they braced for the next move from the Drax, a newfound resolve filled the ranks, stronger than any armor, sharper than any blade. The tide was turning. As the Deathworld Cadets took their places, an uncanny quiet settled over the battlefield. Warriors of every kind, armor-clad, scaled, furred, and covered in exoskeletons, watched with a mixture of respect and anxiety as humans joined their ranks. For the first time, the disciplined and relentless Drax halted, stopping just outside of firing range. It was as if both sides sensed an unspoken need to assess each other. Captain Kale Ryder strode purposefully down the line, his orders crisp and unwavering. His cadets responded with practiced precision, establishing a solid perimeter with an efficiency that left their alien comrades stunned. Trained on the galaxy's most treacherous worlds, these cadets were warriors forged in lethal conditions. Compared to their usual battlefields, this one was almost forgiving. General Axer studied Captain Ryder closely, noting the composed determination that radiated from him. Ryder and his team carried themselves with a calmness that transcended mere skill or discipline. It was as if they had accepted the chaos before them and embraced it fully. Hardened by years of combat, Axer had faced countless horrors across the galaxy, yet he felt a rare sense of reassurance in their presence. Nearby, Lieutenant Rank of the Tuvan forces shifted uneasily. "General, I'm not sure how to read them," he murmured. "They look almost eager, as if this is what they were born to do." Axer cast a sidelong glance at his lieutenant, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. "They don't fear battle, Rank. They've made a life of it. This is what they know." Before Rank could reply, a powerful tremor shook the ground, sending clouds of dirt and debris into the air. The Drax had resumed their approach. Their massive 8-legged war tanks advanced in mechanical unison, each equipped with firepower capable of wiping out entire units in a single blast. Behind them, ranks of Drax soldiers marched forward, their strides perfectly synchronized. "To your stations!" Ryder's voice cut through the din, steady and resolute. The Deathworld Cadets moved with a practiced confidence that bordered on reckless, each one adjusting fluidly to the landscape. Unlike the Drax's strict formation, the cadets embraced adaptability, adjusting their positions as though they could foresee every shift in the battle. They weren't merely following commands. They were responding, reacting, as though in sync with the enemy's every intention. Scattered across the lines, Ryder's cadets blended in with their alien allies. The other soldiers looked on, wary and expectant, as the humans prepared. Some among them had fought with humans before and knew of their strength and resilience. But these cadets were something else. There was a raw, indomitable resolve in their eyes, a drive that went beyond duty alone. "Hold steady," Ryder's voice commanded, his weapon raised as the Drax tanks rolled into range. A faint smile crept across his face. "Let them come." The first blast split the silence, a sharp whine followed by a fiery eruption as the Dracs unleashed their opening attack. The ground quaked under the impact, hurling some allied soldiers backward as the force rattled the line. Smoke and dust swallowed the battlefield, and visibility vanished in the ensuing chaos. Yet the Deathworld Cadets moved without hesitation. Ryder and his squad navigated the smoky maze, slipping between blasts with an ease born of practice. Debris and smoke became their allies, providing cover as they launched a counteroffensive. Their weapons, a lethal blend of high-powered rifles, plasma grenades, and close combat blades, felt like natural extensions of themselves, and they attacked with merciless precision. General Axer watched in astonishment as the humans tore through the Drax forces. Their movements were sharp, each action deliberate yet unpredictable, striking at the heart of the enemy ranks. Unlike the Drax's ordered regiments, the cadets operated with a fluidity that was almost disorienting. They moved individually, yet remained perfectly in sync, instinctively covering each other's blind spots. Lieutenant Rank, wide-eyed, turned to Axer. They're destabilizing the Drax, sir. The Drax can't keep up with them. Rank was right. The Drax, who had always relied on their strength in numbers and precise tactics, seemed thrown off balance by the cadets' chaotic intensity. For the first time, their disciplined ranks showed cracks, the perfect formations breaking as they struggled to respond to the humans' unexpected assault. Then Ryder's voice cut through the comms once again. "Pull back now." He directed the command to the Allied troops behind him, who looked on in confusion as the Deathworld Cadets began to withdraw, coaxing the Drax further into the battlefield. It was a dangerous maneuver, requiring impeccable timing, but Ryder led it with flawless execution. The cadets lured the Drax deeper, then split into small teams, deftly slipping behind the advancing lines to flank them. The Allied soldiers caught on quickly, rallying around the humans as they adopted the new strategy. A surge of renewed energy filled Axer as he and his troops joined the assault. The Drax, blindsided by the rapid shift in tactics, scrambled to reform, but it was too late. Amid the disarray, Ryder's voice returned over the comms, laced with a steely resolve that sent a chill down Axer's spine. "Take out the tanks. We won't hold them off if those things keep firing." The cadets didn't hesitate. They paired off, closing in on the tanks with a speed and agility that defied belief. Plasma shots and explosive charges rained down on the hulking machines, each impact tearing into their thick armor. Fallon, a tall, wiry cadet with a calm demeanor that masked her fierce nature, lobbed a plasma grenade at a tank's main gun mount, diving for cover as the explosion obliterated the turret. Through the haze and chaos, the Deathworld Cadets surged forward, pushing the once invincible Drax forces to their limits. The vehicle shuddered to a stop, smoke pouring from its core as it ground to a halt. Across the battlefield, a cadet named Izar fought with a ruthless, methodical efficiency, leaving a line of defeated Drax in his path. His movements were smooth, almost like a dance, each strike and shot executed with deadly precision, as if his entire life had been preparation for this single moment. Yet the battle was far from over. The Drax, momentarily thrown off balance, regrouped with chilling speed. Their commanders barked orders, bringing the soldiers back into a tight formation. Though few Drax tanks remained, those that did continued firing, each blast tearing fresh craters into the earth and scattering soldiers across the field. Ryder's voice cut through the noise, calm but edged with urgency. "We're running out of time, General. Is there any heavy support left on the eastern flank?" Axer quickly checked his comms, his face darkening. The eastern flank had suffered heavy losses earlier. Only a few Tuvan artillery units were still operational. It was a slim chance, but their only one. "Coordinates sent to artillery now," Axer replied, his voice tight with tension. "We'll need a miracle to make this work." "Then let's make one," Ryder replied, his tone steady as ever. Artillery rounds began raining down with precision on the newly reformed Drax lines, and Axer felt the balance begin to shift. The Drax, still formidable and relentless, were now reacting, no longer dictating the flow of battle. The Deathworld Cadets had introduced a force of chaos, an unpredictable fury that the Drax were struggling to counter. Rank looked at Axer, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and relief. "Sir, they're pushing them back. The cadets, they're actually doing it." Axer, however, remained cautious, his gaze fixed on the battlefield. He knew well not to celebrate too soon. The Drax were far from defeated, and he suspected they would respond with even more brutal ferocity. But for the first time since the fighting began, Axer felt the faint flicker of hope, a spark that, though small, burned fiercely. The Deathworld Cadets had arrived, and the scales had shifted. The battlefield had become a wasteland of scorched earth and shattered metal, with relentless Drax tanks pressing forward. Their precision was faltering, however. The Deathworld Cadets, alongside the Allied forces, had managed to tear through enemy lines, creating breaks in the Drax complex ranks and pockets of fierce resistance. But the Dracs were regrouping with tenacity. For every tank that was destroyed, another seemed to appear over the horizon. For every Drac soldier that fell, 3 more seemed to replace them. The sheer numbers were overwhelming, and even the cadets began to feel the strain. Captain Kale Ryder gritted his teeth as he watched a fresh wave of Drac soldiers crest the ridge. He had faced countless battles, but none had been quite like this. The Dracs weren't just fighting anymore, they were evolving. Their commanders had been studying the Deathworld Cadets' every move, adapting their strategies with alarming speed. What had initially given the Allies a critical edge was now slipping away as the Dracs began to counter the humans' tactics, making the battle's outcome uncertain once more. Fallon, Izar, with me, Ryder's voice crackled over the comms, and within seconds, the 2 cadets were at his side, bruised but still standing. A deep scratch marked Fallon's helmet, her face streaked with sweat and grime. Izar's left arm plate was cracked, revealing a scarred forearm beneath, but his grip on his rifle remained solid. "What's the plan, Captain?" Fallon asked, her tone steady, though her eyes shone with fierce determination. Ryder nodded toward the advancing tanks, their barrels already glowing with the deadly promise of another strike. "We have no other choice. Those tanks need to be taken out before they hit our main line, or we're finished." Fallon's expression tightened, and Izar let out a low whistle. "That's a lot of firepower to tackle, Captain," Izar muttered, "and not much cover." Ryder shrugged, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "We're Deathworld Cadets. Since when has a little firepower ever stopped us?" With that, the 3 of them broke into a sprint, weaving through the chaos toward the looming tanks. Inspired by the cadets' audacious charge, the Allied forces rallied, surging forward and unleashing their own barrage. Plasma blasts and explosive shells tore through the air, detonating with violent intensity, scattering Drax infantry in fiery bursts of debris. From his vantage point, General Axer's heart pounded as he watched the cadets hurtle straight into the heart of the Drax forces. Around him, the Allied soldiers exchanged anxious glances, some whispering encouragement or muttering prayers. The battlefield had become a brutal test of resolve and endurance, and every soldier knew that their survival hung on the success of the cadets' daring maneuver. But just as the cadets neared the tanks, the Drax revealed their own next move. Emerging from behind the armored line, a group of dark, sleek figures stepped forward, Drax shock troopers. These were the elite, clad in reinforced armor and wielding weapons that radiated a sinister energy. They advanced with a deadly, unbreakable precision, each movement flawless as they closed in on the cadets. "Rank," Axer's voice was tight over the comm, "those are Drax elites. They only deploy them in the final stages of an occupation. This is their last stand." A cold chill settled over Axer. The Drax elites were the stuff of legend among the Allied forces, spoken of only in hushed, wary tones. They weren't just warriors, they were conquerors, trained to subdue with ruthless efficiency. If they reached the cadets, even their ferocity and skill wouldn't be enough. "Captain Ryder," Axer barked over the comm, "Drax elites are moving in. Fall back to cover. Avoid direct engagement." A brief pause, then Ryder's voice came through, calm and unyielding. "Understood, General. But if we retreat now, those tanks will make it through. We don't have another option." Axer's fists clenched, the weight of his decision pressing down heavily. He knew Ryder was right. Retreating now would leave the Allied defenses vulnerable to the crushing advance of the Drax tanks. Yet sending the cadets into direct combat with the Drax's elite forces felt like a death sentence. Almost as if sensing Axer's hesitation, Ryder's voice came through the comms once more, softer this time. "General, this is what we're here for. Let us do our job." Axer swallowed hard, his voice barely a murmur. "May the stars be with you, Captain." With that, the comm went silent, and the cadets continued their charge. The next moment, the Drax weren't satisfied until every line of defense lay in ruins, indifferent to the lives lost on either side. Ryder's voice remained steady, but his eyes held a steely resolve as he glanced at Axer. "Looks like we're not done yet, General." Axer nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him once more. "No, Captain, we're not." He raised his voice, calling out to the weary troops gathered around. "All units, prepare for what's next." Nearby, Rank watched the Deathworld Cadets with a mixture of admiration and trepidation. "They're different, aren't they?" he muttered, almost to himself. Axer's gaze followed Ryder as he moved among his soldiers, checking on each one with a quiet camaraderie that needed no words. "Different, yes," Axer replied. "They're a breed of their own. For Deathworlders, this isn't just survival. To them, this is life." The Allied soldiers had begun to gather in small groups, some tending to the wounded, others sorting through the debris of the battlefield. The cadets' exploits had spread quickly, and soldiers from across the Alliance, Toyne, Rari, Carvin, and others, looked on with a blend blend of awe and reverence. Tales of human resilience, of death worlders who could endure planets others would flee, were now no longer just stories. They were made real by these battered, bloodied soldiers who stood undeterred. As Ryder turned to address his cadets, a deep, rhythmic sound filled the air, a slow, resonant drumming echoing through the ranks of the alien forces. Heads turned to see a group of Rari soldiers, their silver-scaled bodies gleaming under the dull light, striking their weapons against their shields in a solemn, steady rhythm. It was an ancient gesture of respect, a tribute among the Rari to honor those who fought with unyielding courage. The sound grew as other species joined in. The Tuvan raised their blasters high, chanting in their low, rumbling voices. Even the Carven, known for their unshakable stoicism, placed clawed hands over their hearts in silent tribute. In the midst of it all stood the cadets, their battered armor and worn faces bearing witness to the brutal battle they had survived. Ryder glanced over his shoulder at Axer, an eyebrow raised in quiet surprise. "Respect from the Rari? That's rare," he murmured, a touch of reluctant appreciation in his tone. Axer allowed himself a small smile. "You've earned it, Captain. Every one of you has." For a brief moment, a powerful sense of unity filled the battlefield, a shared bond of those who had fought side by side, shedding blood and pushing against insurmountable odds. Differences faded, their species, cultures, and histories momentarily irrelevant in the face of their shared survival. But the calm shattered as a voice crackled urgently over Axer's comm. "General, we've intercepted Drax transmissions. Scouts on the outer rim report incoming movement." "Sir, it's another fleet, headed directly this way." The news hit like a blow, and Axer felt his heart sink. The battle was far from over, and the Drax Empire was sending yet another wave through a whirlwind of violence and chaos. The cadets clashed head-on with the Drax elites, each side moving with a lethal grace, transforming the battlefield into a brutal dance of destruction. Fallon narrowly evaded a swing from a plasma blade, retaliating with a swift slash of her combat knife that sliced through the elite's armor. Nearby, Izar fired a round straight into an elite's chest, the impact sending the Drax warrior sprawling backward. Ryder wove through the chaos like a force of nature, his rifle firing with precise, unyielding accuracy. He narrowly avoided a blast from a tank, the explosion close enough to scorch his armor but leaving him unharmed. Every move, every strike, displayed his training and the relentless discipline that had forged him into a Deathworld cadet. But the Drax elites were unyielding. For every one that fell, two more took its place, each stronger, faster, deadlier. The cadets held their ground, but the strain was beginning to show. Fallon's movements became slower, her breaths labored as she parried another blow. Izar's rifle clicked empty, and with a muttered curse, he drew his sidearm, fending off two attackers simultaneously. Watching from his vantage point, Axer felt a sinking helplessness as the cadets fought with every ounce of strength they had. The Allied forces behind them attempted to push forward, but the Drax tanks kept them pinned down with a relentless barrage of fire. Then, suddenly, a blinding light filled the sky, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. Axer shielded his eyes, squinting upward as an enormous shadow descended from the clouds. A ship unlike anything he'd seen, armed to the teeth and bearing the unmistakable insignia of the Deathworld Cadets. The Harbinger. The ship's mere presence was enough to bring both the Allied and Drax forces to a standstill, each side staring in awe and dread as the colossal vessel hovered overhead. From the belly of the Harbinger, a series of pods began to launch, each crashing into the ground with explosive force. The pod doors opened, and more Deathworld cadets stepped out, fully armed and ready to enter the fray. With deadly precision, the newly arrived cadets joined the battle, their presence infusing the Allied soldiers with a fresh surge of courage and striking terror into the Drax ranks. Ryder's voice crackled over the comms, filled with fierce satisfaction. "Reinforcements are here. All units, push forward." The Allies responded instantly, their war cries rising as they charged alongside the cadets. The Drax, visibly shaken by the sudden onslaught of human reinforcements, wavered, their formations splintering as they scrambled to reorganize. The cadets, relentless and efficient, tore through the Drax lines with a ferocity that was almost brutal in its intensity. Revitalized by the arrival of their comrades, Fallon and Izar fought with renewed vigor, each strike landing with even greater power. Leading the charge, Ryder pressed forward, his rifle blazing, his commands a constant anchor for his team. Yet the Drax were not finished. The elites quickly regrouped, forming a defensive perimeter around the remaining tanks. Though they were outmatched, pride and training kept them standing firm, prepared to fight to the bitter end. This was their last stand, and they would go down swinging. From his vantage, Axer watched as the Deathworld cadets and Allied forces closed in on the Drax line, the anticipation thick and heavy. He knew this was it, the final push, the decisive moment moment that could end the battle and shift the course of the war. With unmatched ferocity, the cadets surged forward, their weapons flashing as they cut into the Drax ranks. The elites fought back with deadly accuracy, moving in swift, coordinated attacks, meeting the cadets with every ounce of strength they had. The ground was soaked in blood and charred earth, the air thick with smoke and the metallic tang of weapon fire. And then, in one final explosive burst, the last Drax tank erupted in a blinding shower of flame and metal, and the battlefield fell silent. The elites, their numbers decimated, stood motionless, gazing at the Deathworld Cadets with a blend of hatred and respect as they grasped the reality of their defeat. Captain Ryder lowered his rifle, surveying the ruined battlefield with steady eyes. The battle was over, but it had come at a staggering cost. As the dust settled, Axer approached Ryder, his voice a soft murmur. "We did it." Ryder's gaze was unreadable as he replied, "For now, General. But this war isn't over." The battlefield lay quiet, blanketed in a haze of dust and smoke, with the acrid smell of scorched metal and burned earth hanging heavy in the air. Broken fragments of Drax armor were scattered across the field, mingled with the remains of Allied equipment. Among the wreckage, soldiers stood in silence, faces reflecting a mix of exhaustion and relief as they began to grasp the scale of what had just occurred. The Drax had been beaten, at least for today, but the victory had come with a heavy price. General Axer walked slowly through the debris-strewn battlefield, his eyes drifting over the countless fallen, both Drax and Allied, that lay scattered across the ground. The faces of his remaining soldiers, some slumped in exhaustion and others locked in quiet grief, mirrored the heavy fatigue he felt deep in his bones. They had won, but victory felt hollow, weighed down by the cost of so many lives. The unspoken weight of their losses hung over them, thick as a fog. Rank limped up beside him, wincing from the plasma burn on his leg. His usual keen gaze was dulled by exhaustion, his jaw set in a hard line. "General, what happens now?" Axer let the question hang in the air, silent and unresolved. He didn't have an answer that felt fitting. Yes, they had defeated the Drax here, but the Drax Empire was immense, and this victory was but a temporary pause in the conflict. With each battle, the toll on their forces grew heavier. "We hold," Axer replied finally, his voice weighted and resigned. "We gather our wounded, repair what we can, and prepare for whatever comes next." As they spoke, the Deathworld Cadets regrouped on the far side of the field. They moved with quiet purpose, tending to one another's injuries and supporting those who could barely stand. Their armor, battered and scorched, bore the marks of battle like badges of honor. Each dent and burn told a story, a testament to what they had endured and survived. Captain Ryder approached, his helmet tucked under his arm, his face lined with exhaustion and the weight of hard-won experience. He had fought through battles like this before, but the weariness in his expression was unmistakable. When his gaze met Axer's, there was a silent understanding between them, a recognition of the burdens carried by those who lead soldiers into the chaos of war and manage, somehow, to return. "Captain," Axer greeted him with a nod, his voice rough from the smoke and grit coating his throat. "You and your cadets, you've done more than we could ever have asked. This victory is as much yours as it is ours." Ryder gave a faint, half smile, though it held little mirth. "The fight isn't over, General. We both know that. The Drax, they won't stop. They'll be back." Axer sighed, feeling the weight of Ryder's words settle heavily within him. The truth was undeniable. The Drax Empire was an unstoppable machine, a force that ground entire civilizations to dust in its wake. They would recover, regroup, and return stronger and more determined. This hard-won victory was just a temporary lull in a much longer war. Still, there was something different in the cadets' stance, a quiet resilience that seemed to defy the terror that the Drax commanded. The Deathworld Cadets weren't like the other soldiers in the Alliance. They didn't flinch or hesitate in the face of the enemy. They had been molded by worlds as deadly, if not deadlier, than any battlefield. For them, survival wasn't just about strength or strategy. It was about resilience, a hardened spirit that persisted even when faced with the overwhelming force of the Drax Empire. And perhaps, Axer thought, it was that resilience that would carry them through whatever came next. He exchanged a grim look with Ryder, whose jaw tightened as his expression darkened. "All units, prepare for immediate repositioning," Axer commanded, his voice strong and clear. "Reinforce the defensive lines, and I want medical teams working double time. We don't have much time, but we'll use every second we have." The soldiers sprang into action, fatigue momentarily forgotten as they snapped into formation, checking weapons, shoring up barriers, and bracing for the coming assault. Though exhaustion lined every face, a new resolve radiated among the troops, a fierce determination they hadn't possessed before. They had won one grueling fight, but more importantly, they had glimpsed a truth they'd nearly forgotten. The Deathworld Cadets had shown them that that the Dracs were not invincible. Victory, however brief, was within their grasp. As Ryder prepared to join his cadets at the front, Axer reached out, catching the captain by the arm and holding him back for a moment. "Captain, I want you to know, your cadets have given us more than a win here. They've given us something we thought we'd lost. The belief that we can survive this." Ryder's expression softened, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes as he looked at Axer. "Thank you, General, but we're not here to inspire. We're here to fight. And if we go down, we'll make sure we take as many of them as we can with us." With a nod, Axer released Ryder's arm, watching as the captain joined his squad. The cadets were already in formation, their faces set in steely determination as they prepared for the inevitable clash. They were battered, blood-stained, and exhausted, but they stood unbowed, each one a figure of unbreakable strength. Overhead, the sky darkened with the looming presence of the Drax fleet. The shadow of their ships stretched ominously across the battlefield, casting a pall over the waiting Allied forces. Tension hung in the air, electric with the anticipation of what lay ahead. Every soldier, every cadet, and every Allied warrior felt it. The calm before the storm, the test that would either break them or make them legends. As the Drax ships descended, the low hum and steady pulse of their engines reverberated across the field, darkening the land with their shadowed threat. The Deathworld Cadets stood unflinching, their eyes fixed on the incoming enemy with a quiet, fierce resolve. They had fought once and won. Now, as the next wave approached, they prepared to fight again, not driven by hope of victory, but by their refusal to surrender. The ground trembled as the Drax approached. Their fleet cast lengthening shadows over the unified ranks of the Alliance, the Deathworld Cadets standing shoulder to shoulder with warriors of every species, gazing steadily at the darkening sky. This was the place where the battle would end, one way or another. Ryder and Axer shared a final, silent look. Ryder's expression remained steady, though a weight rested in his gaze, a quiet acknowledgement of the monumental odds they faced. Axer, bruised and worn but standing tall, placed a firm hand on Ryder's shoulder. "Captain, whatever happens out there," Axer's voice was barely audible, thick with the gravity of the moment, "I'm honored to have fought beside you." Ryder gave a short nod, his gaze hard and unwavering. "Same to you, General. Let's make it count." He turned to face his cadets, each one ready, weapons drawn, eyes locked on the advancing Drax forces. Fallon, her face etched with exhaustion but her expression steely with resolve, caught his eye and nodded. Izar, bruised and bloodied, lifted his rifle in a silent salute. Ryder raised his own weapon in response, and together they formed up, their stances solid as they braced for what was to come. As the Drax fleet descended, their ships revealed a chilling menace, sleek and black, with a cold, unyielding design. Each vessel was equipped with devastating weapons, capable of obliterating squads with a single blast. From their metallic depths, wave after wave of Drax soldiers poured out, not in disciplined ranks but in a relentless flood, a final wave meant to crush any remaining resistance. The Allied forces held their lines, tense but resolute, fingers tight on triggers, eyes fixed on the descending enemy. A thick, charged silence hung over the battlefield, broken only by the hum of engines and the occasional crackle of distant comms. Then, with a powerful, defiant roar, Captain Ryder's voice rang out across the field, rekindling every soldier's resolve. "Cadets, forward!" The Deathworld Cadets surged ahead, a lethal blur of precision and force. The Allied soldiers followed, a unified tide from across countless worlds, rallying together against a common threat. Plasma fire lit up the air, grenades arced toward the enemy line, and explosions tore through the first ranks of Drax troops. The cacophony was overwhelming, a symphony of chaos and fury as the two armies collided. Ryder led the charge into the heart of the enemy, his rifle blazing with unerring accuracy. Fallon was at his side, every move deliberate, her blade flashing as she cut down Drax soldiers with cold efficiency. Izar moved like a phantom in the haze of battle, dodging blasts and returning fire with a precision that seemed almost otherworldly. The Drax struck back with brutal force. Their elite soldiers advanced with weapons that crackled with raw energy, each blast indiscriminately tearing through metal and flesh alike, leaving smoldering craters in the scorched earth. The Allied forces fell in waves, each loss a stark reminder of the impossible odds. But still, they pressed forward. There was no retreat, no surrender. This was a fight to the last breath. The Deathworld Cadets cut a path through the battlefield, their presence a rallying beacon for the troops around them. Their reputation, forged in the fires of countless brutal battles, was no exaggeration. They fought with a fearless resolve, a defiance that sparked courage in every soldier beside beside them. Against the overwhelming darkness of the Drax onslaught, the cadets held fast. They were battered, their numbers thinning, but they stood unyielding, their strength a living testament to the resilience and tenacity of those who refused to surrender, no matter the odds. When the line began to waver, a cadet would step forward, pressing on, standing firm, refusing to retreat. Their resolve spread like fire, and as the Allied forces watched the steadfast determination of their human allies, they felt a strength they hadn't known lay within them. But the Drax would not relent. Each line the cadets broke was quickly replaced by another. The battlefield became a relentless cycle of assault and defense, an endless struggle where neither side would give way. Smoke and the biting scent of scorched metal filled the air, mingling with the cries of the injured and the thunder of explosions. In the midst of the chaos, Ryder rallied his cadets, his voice cutting through the comms with unwavering command. Yet, as a fresh wave of Drax troops poured from newly arrived ships, the cadets, worn down and vastly outnumbered, began to feel the weight of the battle. Even Ryder, his armor scorched and his breathing labored, sensed that they were nearing their limit. Then, a crackle in his comm brought Fallon's voice, strained and urgent. "Captain, we're down to our last clips. If support doesn't arrive soon." Ryder clenched his jaw, scanning the ravaged battlefield. There were no more reinforcements. They were the last defense. He steadied his voice as he keyed into the comms. "Fallon, Izar, all units, this is it. We hold the line. No retreat." He saw the cadets exchange nods, watched the Allied forces gather their strength for the final stand. With one deep breath, Ryder lifted his weapon, his voice cutting through the air like steel. "All units, forward." The final surge was an eruption of fire and fury. The Deathworld Cadets fought with a determination that came from the very core of their training, a resilience forged by their will to endure. They fought not for accolades or reward, but because this was their essence, warriors who stood their ground against the impossible. The Drax, with their endless ranks and power, clashed with an enemy that would not yield. The Allied forces charged with a resolve that bordered on madness, throwing themselves into the fray without hesitation. Every Drax who fell was soon replaced, yet the cadets remained unshaken, standing firm with a tenacity that defied all logic. Hours wore on, though time seemed lost amid the blood and debris. The battlefield, once alive with movement, was now a desolate field of fallen soldiers and shattered machinery. Yet the Deathworld Cadets, though battered and wounded, kept fighting. Their ranks were thin, their armor torn, but they stood, eyes fixed on the remaining Drax forces with fierce determination. Finally, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the field, an uncanny silence settled, enveloping the wasteland in quiet. The last of the Drax forces had fallen. Their ships lay as smoldering wrecks, and their soldiers were vanquished. The Allied forces stood in a dazed silence, barely able to grasp the weight of what they had accomplished. Though they had won, it felt like a hollow victory, overshadowed by the heavy toll paid in lives. Ryder lowered his weapon, his chest rising and falling heavily as he scanned the battlefield. Fallon stumbled over, her face pale and her eyes wide with exhaustion and disbelief. Izar joined them, his arm bound in a makeshift sling, his face streaked with blood and soot. We actually did it," Fallon murmured, her voice raw with strain. Ryder nodded, but his gaze was far away, burdened by the gravity of their survival. Around them, the field had become a graveyard, a stark reminder of the price of war. The Deathworld Cadets and the Allied forces had given their all, and they had won, but no one felt the joy of victory. Only a deep, solemn silence lingered. General Axer approached, his face a mixture of pride and sorrow. He looked to Ryder, his expression softening as he surveyed the worn and weary soldiers. "Captain," Axer spoke quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you, each and every one of you. We couldn't have done this without your bravery." Ryder's eyes met Axer's, and he allowed himself a small, weary smile. "Just doing our job, General. We're Deathworld Cadets. This is what we do." Axer nodded, his own smile touched with sadness. "Well, whatever you call it, you saved us all." Ryder fell silent, his gaze drifting over the battlefield, feeling the weight of the battle settle heavily on his shoulders. He knew this victory wouldn't be the last. There would be more battles to face, more sacrifices to make. But for now, they had defied the odds. They had held the line and prevailed. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the desolate field, the Deathworld Cadets stood united, bruised but unbroken. They had confronted the full might of the Drax Empire and endured. The cost had been immense, yet they knew they would be ready when the next fight came. For now, the silence honored those who had fallen, a tribute to their sacrifice. And as the final rays of light faded, the cadets stood tall, knowing they had done their duty. They were more than just soldiers. They were Deathworld Cadets, forged in fire and blood. The galaxy would remember them, and while the war might be far from over, power, they would continue to stand in defiance of the darkness. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing and giving us a like. Stay tuned for more tales to come. Goodbye, human.